All right, and welcome to this webinar. We are having a webinar tonight with Greenhouse CI. The topic hassle-free continuous integration combined with real device testing. I have a pleasure to co-host this webinar together with Nikita Avagumov. Hey, Nikita, can you hear me?
Sorry, hi. Hi everybody, welcome to the webinar. Hoping that this will be fun and educational.
Excellent, that's a good audio check. So can you please, people, let me know in the questions box if there's any sound quality issues or any issues with the general presentation graphics or anything at all. If everything works fine, we will keep going. So a couple of practicalities before we start. So with the GoToWebinar control panel, you can throw questions to us at any time during the next 45 minutes. We will actually dedicate some 15 minutes at the end for the questions, and we will go through all of these questions. So please, if you have any questions about the topic, anything related to this topic, please let us know, and we'll be happy to discuss and also follow up with you later on if you something you want to know about this topic. So for the agenda today, we will actually go through a bit slides first. There's a couple of paradigm things we want to cover, especially with this when we talk about mobile testing and shift left. So I'm talking why and how people see this shift left today and what basically mobile DevOps mean in that context. Also, we talk quite a lot about mobile DevOps, agile methods, continuous integration, of course, a couple of other things that are very practical and highly used with the teams doing agile, or having agile practices. We look at also some of the delivery pipeline things for how people actually build their apps today, what sort of things they confront, and what are the challenges when they have this delivery pipeline for their apps. We also outline some requirements for the how do you actually adopt mobile DevOps and how do you basically use it for your internal doings. And of course, at the end, we will have a hands-on demonstration. So we look at the pretty fancy tool actually from Greenhouse CI. So how you basically build things on cloud. And then I show you how you get actually that application built with Greenhouse CI. How do you actually test it with our Bitbar public cloud? And as said, we will have a questions and answer at the end of this webinar. So please use the right-hand side box and throw your questions in. We'll try to tackle all of them by the end of this webinar. So when we say shift left and shift left testing, this is what people think shift left testing is. So they typically think that shift lefting means that you push all the testing effort at the beginning or very early stage of the development, when actually more traditional testing happened before the release. And when the release came up, you kept going and testing even it was already published and out. How we actually see this shift left is more like a different approach. You basically test all the time. That means continuous testing. Again, the old approach, when you have a release coming or nearing and you want to push it out, you basically kept accelerating all the testing efforts with the old approach. With the new approach, you pretty much test all the time. You test when you have a new build available, you test certain sprint outcomes, and also some of the even not that meaningful things, but you keep testing them because you utilize test automation. So how do you actually adopt this kind of shift left and the new approach, continuous testing? So we all know this code, build, test, package, release, configuration, and monitoring kind of being somewhat incremental path, building the application, creating that application. But when you think about that, how do you adopt that in sprints? You still have code, you still have build, you still have testing, And you have the packaging, which means the deployment on certain target, getting that tested and verified on the real environment. So that basically means when you include all these steps in your sprints, it means continuous testing. And you can continuously, by every release, even daily basis, test and test and test what actually was regressed with the recent build. Slightly more detailed view of this. So one sprint, couple of weeks, how developers sees this. They might have a sprint meeting, they have a development going on, they commit some source code to their source code management system. And once that's done, they can easily build a application and get that tested with the test automation. So that application can be easily pushed for the service like Bitbar public cloud and get it tested on those real devices. Of course, that will generate all these test reports, and they will be on the next day on the desk of the developer, which can check the reports, inspect what's something that they should jump on right away if there's any bugs, problems, or something, and fix those issues and commit the fixed source again to the repository. And that keeps going until the sprint is basically done. Looking at the mobile DevOps, what's new in mobile DevOps and how it's different from Agile? So, of course, this modern development environment and tools are adapting and streamlining how Agile is adopted by companies. But very often we hear that development infrastructure doesn't support that agility really well. There might be, emulator-related testing going on. There might be some crowdsourcing or some even manual testing going on during sprints. And that, of course, means that you lose the efficiency and you lose the productivity if you don't get thorough and comprehensive test reports of your testing efforts. And of course, like with the DevOps, you combine development with the QA, testing, all the testing folks and operations, you get the mobile DevOps. What's so great about the mobile DevOps, basically? So everybody knows continuous integration, how that gets value for testing effort, how that continuous delivery and deployment actually helps to get the release out for a real target, and how operations work in that context. But of course, like in mobile app development, the speed typically matters. That's the biggest fact. You have to get things done faster and get things out earlier. And there's significant need for this sort of mobile DevOps tools, like, not only tools, of course, but the practices as well. So the pace and the quality of these kind of services that they can provide for basic doing, agile, what basically DevOps meant for desktop or server-based apps or even web-based development is what we have to see in mobile app development. There's a couple of things with mobile DevOps, like, still tools are pretty much fragmented across the whole chain. There's, of course, more complex environments. There's more tools available. You are not necessarily how you adapt all the tools well, how you use them. But this kind of streamlined development, cohesive and well-integrated development flow kind of derives from the practices that are used with mobile development. And of course, you should always try to avoid the manual doing. That basically kills the productivity. If you start testing using manually testing on devices or emulators or something else, you basically lose the productivity that all this mobile DevOps test automation would bring to the table. Looking at this pipeline, so of course everything starts with the development. There's a great bunch of great tools available, IDEs. There is defect management systems. There's communication applications that help the development get the thing done. There's source code management variety of tools available: Git, GitHubs, GitLabs, Bitbuckets, all these great tools. You get just restore everything. When we come to this build environment, continuous integration has been seen as one of the epicenter of the build step. What we will see today is awesome demonstration from Greenhouse CI, how they actually do the build and how it actually changes the basic doing that mobile app developers can actually get their apps builded and build for the ready testing and deployment. Testing, of course, should be always automated. I'm going to focus a bit more on this with my demo. Plus, there's going to be more information about how test automation can bring new benefits for the mobile DevOps delivery. So what we're going to focus pretty much today is this: build, test, deploy, and production. And that's the scope of the mobile DevOps we keep talking about. Continuous integration combined with test automation and the deployment of those apps or even builds for beta testers or actual devices, or even used in the enterprise context where enterprises build apps for themselves. And of course, at the production, once you get something out, how do you monitor behavior of that app? How do you monitor that things are working fine for the end users? Build, we will see a demo of this. It's going to be awesome demo, but one of the thing with the build is that it should be always seamlessly backwards compatible with the source codes. So once you do something and you build a new version of your app, it should be, of course, testable on those devices, but also those source codes someone has committed, they should be available for the next iteration and so on. And again, manual testing, this is something that you should try to avoid. There's a ways to manually test things. Even you don't have a device. There's bunch of remote access environments where you can actually adopt any device, get the application running over there, and see the results instantly. Interact by yourself and see how things work. Nevertheless, continuous integration is the core and epicenter of this build step. So things start with the developers pushing something on the repo. CI is pulling that, and it builds you package application and notifies the users whether it's something failed, or whether it was successful. And the application testers or the QA folks can then run it on devices, or even this can be combined so that there's instant app pushing from CI and build to the testing environment. That's what we're going to also demo later this evening. Mentioned it a few times, but testing on real devices is absolute must. You definitely want to make sure the application works across all the possible device variants. You don't want to jeopardize the revenue or end user experience that it wasn't just perfectly tested before the release happened. There's a great tools finding issues with the applications running on those devices, even debugging, fixing problems based on the test results that you get from device runs. You get all the logs, videos, screenshots. So it's instrumental part of the mobile DevOps to use test automation and get that test automation built tightly into this delivery pipeline. This is something we actually gather from our users. They're running tests on our devices and our cloud. This is pretty interesting because roughly 55% of the issues, they see tests running on those devices, or tests against the application running on those devices. 55% are hardware related. That basically means there's four pretty much each equal size of segments that actually cause the issues for those tests: displays, You might get a different portrait or landscape mode in a device, and your test starts working flaky. Sensors, not all the devices are combined or included with the latest sensor technology. You might not have everything there, or they perform differently, or they are not calibrated. Those sort of things. Also, what people typically don't realize that there's a lot of differences with hardware chipsets. The CPU, GPU, and silicon in general. They measure too much the performance in context of how many cores, what's the clock rate is with that device. But various mobile benchmarks show us all these differences that chipsets actually contain. Also, size of memory scales quite a lot based on the devices. So some of them have more, some of them have less, and that basically causes apps to work differently. From the software side of things, 45% actually found during this data. Majority of those are related to some sort OEM customizations. So especially on Android, OEMs customize their devices. They want to differentiate themselves from other OEMs. They want to build their legacy stuff in their specific UIs and stuff like that. So that kind of breaks the user experience sometimes. And especially it breaks the user experience of those apps. And that gets, throughout when these apps are tested on those real devices. Also, the platform issues. We saw iOS 10 coming out recently, and lots of changes, not only for the devices and users, but also for the development tools. Xcode 8 versus Xcode 7 running pretty much everything. New test framework, XCUI test versus UI automation. Lots of those sort of things are coming constantly from these OEMs that you have to maintain and make sure that your environment is up to snuff. We also show some metrics on how basically what sort of number of devices you need to cover certain markets. And this keeps growing. Pretty much interesting fact is that of course more handsets are coming, but there are certain popularity level of certain devices that they get, especially in US, and you suddenly see that you need to add 15 new devices in your testing roster. Pretty much the same applies for the global market. And if you want to cover majority of devices, you need to add like 140, 175 devices for your test automation. With Bitbar public cloud, or also known as tester cloud, that's no big deal. It can be easily adapted, and you can enable testing on those devices. And of course, what happens in that testing effort? You can use the local environment. You can access from your local environment using remote manual testing or remote manual access to those devices. You can use very efficient test automation, use the test exercisers, or you can integrate everything using the REST API with your own local environment. And things will get eventually tested on those devices, and you get all the results back the local environment. Deployment is also one of the steps we're going to focus here. So how do you basically cut that significant effort to just hours? And mobile DevOps has a solution for that, but it needs to be adopted. It needs to be tightly integrated with test automation. When you get everything tested thoroughly and you get things verified, you basically can deploy that package on any of these markets, or basically your own local environments if you use something like that to deliver your apps for your users. Finally, the monitoring. There's lots of debate about what's the right approach, whether it's a synthetic mobile monitoring, real user monitoring, what kind of environment should you use emulators, should you use real devices. Those are very opinionated. Of course, the real networks, real environments, and real backend connections always provide the most authentic environment. So this pretty much captures my part of the slides. When we talk about user experience, you can build a package. You basically get the binaries. You can use it for beta testing, crowdsourcing type of testing, or you can automate it internally. You don't have to build the infrastructure yourself, but you can rely on services like Bitbar to get all that delivered for you. Those get deployed on devices, or you get deployed and release those for production, which means basically that there's applications used by real users, and you get metrics and data how those things work with that app. So the final slide from my end. So basically, we rebranded ourselves recently for having years of Testroid as our main brand. We are bringing a new product for monitoring in next few months, and our testing products will be called Bitbar Testing. There's still three deployment options with these. So public cloud, which is also known as Tester Cloud, provides all those devices, real Android and iOS devices, for you on the convenient cloud-based environment, and you can access any of those for manual or test automation or any other sort of testing. The private environment, the private cloud, provides you a reserved, dedicated devices where you can actually have everything maintained, upgraded, and managed for you, so you don't have to deal with the hardware. You don't have to build labs or maintain any of that infrastructure around that, which is significant effort. And on-premise, which is the significant size of device labs if you want to build something on your local premises. Okay, that being said, I'll move this presentation to Nikita, and you can show us some very cool demo.
Okay, I hope everybody can see my screen. So, again, thank you all for coming, and what I would like to talk about dovetails very nicely with the things that Vidavek discussed earlier about the necessity of automated, hands-off, continuous integration in DevOps. Something that would allow you to do things with a minimal of effort, but to still be at the peak of efficiency. And this is what we aim for with Greenhouse CI. We're a continuous integration service in the cloud that is focused squarely on mobile application development. Just to give you a little bit of background about our service, the developers who started Greenhouse were originally mobile developers, such as probably yourselves, and they worked on client projects of all shapes and sizes, including such recognizable names like Skype and Microsoft. And they had come to appreciate the necessity for a robust continuous integration setup, but the in-house solution that they had that was based on Jenkins was basically unacceptable in terms of the amount of time and effort that it was taking them to both and maintain the CI server. And this is not to criticize Jenkins. It's a fantastic tool, obviously, but its main strength, the fact that it is so adaptable and can handle so many different scenarios, also becomes its weakness, because for things that it was not designed out of the box to do, there is really quite a lot of effort that has to go before it can be up and running, and then again ongoing effort to maintain it, update it, etc. And so the solution that the developers came up with was to develop their own tailor-made continuous CI service that would focus on their primary need, which was mobile application development. And this is how Greenhouse CI was born. It started out as an in-house service, but once its potential was appreciated by everybody, it was released to the public, and this is how we operate today. So just to show you what we think about as the requirement for a CI service, what should a CI service do for you? What should you look for in a good CI service? And the way we basically, this familiar diagram, we break it down as you see here. Planning and application development are obviously up to the developer, and then Greenhouse takes over and builds your application, runs automated tests on it, and then distributes it in whichever manner you've configured it. One thing that we don't do is we leave monitoring to others. Basically, we see it as being outside of the core continuous integration service, and there are quite a number of services that already do this exceptionally well. So we haven't tried to roll our own. Instead, what we do is we integrate. And this is what I'll touch on in my next slide. Our philosophy when we're working on Greenhouse, developing new features, deciding what direction to take, is that we want Greenhouse to grow with developers' needs, and we want Greenhouse to be the easy choice, natural choice for any mobile software developer. And basically the two key directions are, first of all, that we want Greenhouse to support all frameworks, tools, basically any tool chains that mobile developers happen to be using at the moment. And so what that means in practical terms for us is that we currently support native iOS and Android applications and cross-platform applications built with Cordova and Ionic platforms. So this already covers the majority of the mobile market, and we can run that natively in Greenhouse. The second direction is that, as I mentioned earlier, we don't try to do things that we see as being, first of all, outside of the core CI experience, and second of all, things that other people are already doing exceptionally well. In the case of CI, no one's doing mobile CI well, and we filled that niche. But when it comes to distribution of your build binaries, when it comes to application monitoring, to crash monitoring, there are other services such as Crashlytics, HockeyUp, TestFairy that do a great job already, and our solution is to integrate with them tightly so that you can take the builds, the binaries from Greenhouse, and simply ship them off to, say, Crashlytics, and they will do the monitoring for you. And that way, everybody basically fulfills their expertise without trying to kind of become a jack of all trades, which I think was kind of the downfall of maybe some of the generic CI solutions, such as Jenkins, as I mentioned earlier. And while I'm talking about this, I would also like to point out that we're currently working on a very comprehensive integration with Bitbar and their testing solutions. This will be a two-way integration, so users of Greenhouse CI will be able to send their build binaries to Bitbar for testing, and vice versa. If you're a customer of Bitbar, you will be able to actually, instead of having to provide a binary, you will be able to send your just your repository, your source code first to Greenhouse, and then Greenhouse will return the binary to Bitbar that will then be tested. So in the next part, I'd like to actually show you what Greenhouse can do for you and how easy it is to get up and running with our service. So let me switch over to, I've lost my mouse. I don't know what's going on. I can switch to another application. Okay, there we go, I'm sorry. So here we go, let's go to Greenhouse. This is our web UI. And all I've done at this point is I set up an account. I registered. I'm not going to show you that. The registration process is as boring as you would expect it to be. But basically, I'm starting with a clean slate, and what I'm going to do is add a new application. And for the demo purposes, what I decided to show you is Google's Authenticator app for Android. And I've chosen it because it's an open source third-party application, so that you know that there are no strings attached. This is also, I have forked or cloned this repository. It's now hosted by us in the Greenhouse, but it's a public repo. You can take a look at it and see that, again, I haven't fiddled with the code. In any way, the only change that I have made was that because we need to have a signed binary at the end of our build, I actually added a key store and the necessary settings to produce a signed binary in the end. So to add a project to Greenhouse, all I need to do is enter the repository URL. This is a public repo, as I mentioned, so there is no authentication that I need to configure. And at this point, I simply hit enter. And what Greenhouse starts doing is it clones the repo and then begins to scan it to figure out what kind of projects it contains, to determine what dependencies it might have, and fetch those as well. So that process is taking a few seconds. It is important that at this point for me to point out that everything that's happening right now in Greenhouse is happening within an isolated sandbox. That sandbox was created just for this particular, in this case, for this particular scan, and it will be destroyed when the scan is finished. And this means that every build, every scan is entirely self-contained, and there is no danger in any kind of cross-contamination. There is no danger of your data or your source code leaking to other Greenhouse users. So it's a very secure solution in that sense. So you can see that we're downloading, Greenhouse automatically is downloading the application's dependencies. This is all happening without any input from me, except for what I did initially, as you saw. And when the scan finishes, we'll be able to enter a few build settings and then kick off our first build. Okay, the scan is complete. In this case, this isn't particularly relevant because this repo only contains a single branch, and in this repo there is only a single project. So otherwise, I would have options here. And for this Android application, I'm just going to choose the assemble task and build everything that task contains. So the build is now running. We can take a look at the logs. Again, you can see this message that Greenhouse is initializing your secure just-in-time sandbox that will be destroyed as soon as the build is complete. And every step that Greenhouse performs is logged out into this log, so you can follow along. Basically, you can see that what Greenhouse is doing is exactly what you would do locally, manually, in order to build this project. So you start by just cloning your repository, once again downloading the dependencies, and then it will proceed to the build steps. What you can see here on the build overview is that Greenhouse has populated the changelog for this build. Since this is the first build for this project, the changelog is extensive and contains basically all the commits that are in the repo up to this point. For any future builds, the changelog will only contain the changes since the last build of this project. You can also see that Greenhouse automatically parsed the name and the icon of the project from the source, and the build is now ongoing. So instead of watching the build log scroll by, which isn't particularly exciting, we can take a look at different configuration options that Greenhouse can offer you. I'll come back to environment in a second, Um, in the build settings, we've already seen everything up here. And the only other thing I would like to show you is that you can enter a particular pattern, and that pattern will be matched against your repo's branches. And what that means is that Greenhouse will trigger builds or not trigger builds, depending on whether you push your code to a branch that either matches or doesn't match this pattern. In the testing tab, you can see that Greenhouse automatically detected that our application has instrumentation tests, and it has enabled them. In the publishing section, so this is your distribution and the various options that you have here. Email, Slack, and HipChat are pretty self-explanatory. Since this is an Android application, we can publish it to Google Play. Had this been an iOS application, we would be able to publish it to iTunes Connect. And if you're building a hybrid application that builds for both Android and iOS, both those options would be here. And here you can see all the other services with which we integrate. So again, as I mentioned in the slides, Hockey App, Crashlytics, Revolution, Test Fairy. These are all sources or providers rather of services such as monitoring, distribution, and they do an excellent job of it. There is no need for us to try to re-implement what they provide instead. You can simply give us the necessary credentials, give us a few configuration settings, and we'll automatically send your binary to wherever you specify once the build is finished. Notifications, again, pretty self-explanatory. The only thing to point out here is webhook notifications. So you can create a custom, give us a custom payload URL to which we will deliver a request once the build is finished. Hooks, this is a pretty powerful feature. So our repo is hosted on Bitbucket, and when I created this project in Greenhouse automatically added webhooks to the repository. What that means is that every time I push code to that repo, or if I create a pull request, this information will be forwarded to Greenhouse, and Greenhouse will trigger a build for any new commit that shows up in Bitbucket. To come back to the environment, so we try to simplify as much as possible. As you can see, I started a build by clicking literally 2 buttons. But if your project requires any additional configuration, you most certainly can set up some pretty complex scenarios. So first of all, we have support for environment variables. This is where, in my case, I committed the key store file and the passwords right to the repo, obviously because this is a demo project. If you do not wish to commit things to your repository, you can enter them as environment variables and upload them as environment files here. Additionally, Greenhouse, again, we run the pretty typical collection of steps: cloning the repo, building the project, testing the project. But what you can do is you can provide custom build steps as well. So you can create scripts that, whether you need to fetch additional dependencies for your project, or you would like to run some extra tests, or whatever it is that you have the need to do during your build, you can do all that through these scripts. And finally, everything that I've talked about so far is actually, it doesn't apply to the project directly. It is encapsulated via something that we call workflows. And I can demonstrate it by adding a new workflow here. And what you can see is when I've done that, we now have 2 different workflows, and each workflow has its own environment settings, build settings, testing, publishing, and notification settings. And what this enables you to do is to set up 2 completely different workflows, for example, for a development version of your app, for a staging version of your app, or a QA version of your app, and for the release version of your app. So how you publish it, how you test it, what settings you use to build it, how you sign it, everything is configurable here. Let's go back to our build. You can see that it is now in the testing phase. You can take a look at the log. So the tests are, you can see that we're running these tests in the emulator. The emulator has booted, and the tests are in progress. The testing tab, also the test app, has appeared, and this is where all the test results will be listed once the testing step is complete. While this is going on, I can show you also our team management. So you can Greenhouse works around the concept of teams, since this is how most mobile developers operate as well. So you can set up multiple teams within your Greenhouse profile, and then basically have different team members with different projects, and all this is manageable here. And in the very near future, we're going to roll out a new feature where we'll do team-based permission controls, so that if you have, for example, outside agencies or freelancers working on your project, you don't have to give them full access to everything. You can limit it, and we find that this is a pretty secure way of working in a larger team, especially if you have a distributed team. So all we need to do now is wait for the tests to wrap up. Not sure what else I can demonstrate to you at this point. I think the real power of what I'm showing, I would say, comes from the fact that everything that I've done was triggered with literally just a few key presses on my end. Everything, all the settings for this build, everything was done automatically for Greenhouse, or by Greenhouse rather. So if you compare that, if you have anything like in-house CI setup, if you're using Jenkins, or if you're using a cloud solution, but a cloud solution that that isn't focused on mobile, but actually is kind of more general purpose and is designed to handle web apps, mobile apps, etc., then the amount of setup that you have to do in Greenhouse compared to any of those solutions is absolutely minimal. So what you can see here is that we have quite a few failing tests, and to any one of you who is skeptical, and I count myself in that number, I had actually tried to build and test the Authenticator app locally using Android Studio, and I can tell you that I got basically all the same test failures as what we're seeing now in Greenhouse. So this ironclad logo of Google Authenticator is maybe slightly misleading. So our run is finished, our test run is finished. You can see the end result is we have a build failure due to failed tests. Greenhouse is now gathering the logs, and it will be publishing the build artifacts. If we go to the testing tab, we can now take a thorough look at tests. You can see that we have 152 passing, but 18 failing tests. For any red test, we can click on the test itself and get a full stack trace of what has actually gone wrong. And what you can see now is the build status here is yellow, so the build itself completed successfully, but tests have failed. What this allows us to do, the Bitbucket integration that I mentioned earlier, what it allows us to do is to push the build status back to Bitbucket. And you can see that we now, Bitbucket has only 2 states for commit. It can either pass or fail a build. So in this case, the build has failed. So if you're looking at this commit on Bitbucket or on GitHub, especially if this is a pull request where you're debating whether or not to merge, you might think twice based on this result. So at this point, I haven't set up any other publishing except for all the artifacts from the build are automatically saved in Greenhouse. I can download the artifacts, and once the download finishes, and I open it up, you can see that the artifact bundle contains all the APKs that were produced as a result of this build, and specifically the one that we're interested in is here, this release APK. So this is a signed, aligned APK that is now ready for testing on real devices or ready for publishing to the Google Play Store. So as I mentioned, the integration between Greenhouse and Bitbar is upcoming. It's in the works. And in the future, you will be able to configure Greenhouse so that this APK is then forwarded automatically to the TestDroid cloud and is tested on real devices there. Until that integration is in place, I had to take the old-fashioned path, and I sent Viliveiko a floppy disk with the APK, and he is now going to be able to test this in TestDroid Cloud. So I'll turn it over to Viliveiko now, and he can show you what testing on real devices looks like.
Excellent. Thank you, Nikita. That was very nice demo. Actually, very powerful tool also for the managing all the build-related things. So, you know, you get definitely done so much more when you don't have to hassle with all that installation and making that environment, you know, built just for building your stuff. So we continue from here. So basically, Nikita showed us how he actually can build that whatever project resided on the any of these repositories. So we basically continue from here. If you are not familiar with our public cloud, this is pretty much what it looks like. So you just create an account, you log in, and you can create projects for yourself for test automation. We support pretty much any open source test automation framework. So there's a lot of by default. Plus, of course, every now and then, some customers have very customized, tailored frameworks or in-house frameworks they build for themselves. So basically, we can cater those as well with our private cloud and on-premise solutions, and also with the dedicated devices here at public cloud in the near future. So we actually saw how Nikita built this authenticator app running over there. So I'm going to show you just briefly how that can get tested here at Bitbar Public Cloud. So I have the same APK. I just create a new test run for this. I actually uploaded it already here, but you can just simply select the file, and you can basically point the file from your local hard disk, or I could take it from the floppy disk that I just got from Nikita, and basically get that uploaded. The next step that I need to do is basically select what sort of tests I want to make for my application or any application I'm running here. As part of our public cloud, we offer this sort of test exerciser called App Crawler. App Crawler basically goes through the application, tries to interact with the UI, opens menus and stuff like that. So it's an easy choice at this stage. We also can use any of the test automation frameworks, but then we have to have a dedicated files and scripts for this. So I'm going to show you the faster version of here with the App Crawler. The next thing, of course, is to select devices we want to use. And we're very proud here at Bitbar that we provide the most comprehensive device farm globally. Then there's literally 5,000 devices or more, and I think unique-wise, we talk about Android close to 500 different models. Plus, there's 60, 70 iOS different variants that we provide. So I'm just selecting a few of them. Let's go to the next step. This is pretty much advanced options. So we can configure test runs even more in detail. We can put the names. We can select language of that. device that we want to get that device running on. So there's a lots of device, different languages available. These are deriving from, of course, from the devices. So as like with the real device on in your hand, you can actually select any devices you want to turn it on. You can also configure how long will test run. You can put timeouts there. Nikita also mentioned about the webhooks and URLs, so we have the same feature available here. And once the integration with the Greenhouse and Bitbar is coming online, we basically get everything from that built environment. What we saw with the Greenhouse demo is coming here as well. And if we use the app crawler, we can configure some basic things, what typically applications are asking for, login credentials, what sort of other information about yourself, so login and passwords, to make sure that you get that, or that test exerciser gets into that app. I'm going to run a test here now. What I'm going to also do is show you, because it takes a few minutes to run on some of these devices. Test just actually got started, but I'm going to show you meanwhile the pre-run test that I just ran yesterday here, what kind of info we get from that. So it was actually same device group that I ran the test, same application, same app crawler test run. It approximately took like 1 minute, something seconds. Installation took something, launching took something, and then the test actually took something. So I'm going to show, for example, let's pick up the device, any of them, and this is what it basically gets you. So I selected some Acer Iconia tablet, and my test exerciser basically took 1 minute 38 seconds for that test. It says tests were succeeded, and we can see what was included in that. So there was some sleep, there was some Android activity change, there was some view ID clicks, more sleeps, there was activity change. And once we actually see this stuff over here, we can also see the screenshot of that any moment, what actually happened when that test or that click or that interaction with the UI was taking place. And screenshots are, of course, very handy when you debug and you see what things go wrong. But device logs, we get, of course, stored everything here for you for every test run, and these also reveal everything about the test run. So definitely developers, they can find out what goes wrong. They see error codes, they see all the warnings. They can filter information here. They can see what happened after the or any time of the when app was running on that device. And as an additional bonus, you of course get some performance indication, how much CPU was consumed any given moment for that test run, what happened with the memory, how much was allocated when it was deallocated, and so on. So there won't be memory leaks, or it doesn't consume too much memory from the device. So you get all these sort of metrics. Plus, the new feature, if you are familiar with Testorid Cloud and Bitbar Public Cloud, we have a new video recording available here. So it actually shows you a video of the test session. I'm not sure if you get to see this because of the GoToWebinar. It might be sometimes preventing showing other additional videos, but let's see if something is going on. So it started the application. It goes to the first initial stage, and you see how it works, which was one of the first test items. And there was some sleep over here. The test itself, or the video itself, has been recorded for 1 minute 13 seconds. So you see status, UIs changing while the test is going on. And of course, this could be done for like mobile games or something else. And you see the gameplay going on, and you see the what happens after each step, and so on. So that's the video part. Let's see if my test run is soon to be finalized. Let's go back to this view. Okay, now it shows that there's 8 devices succeeded, 26 devices are still running, and 1 failed. Let's see why it failed. So you really get all the information about the device runs here with the our public cloud, and you get all the details, of course, pulled back to your local environment as well. Okay, here's the one device run that failed. Installing the application. Okay, so what happened basically here? This application already existed in this particular device. So of course you cannot install the same APK twice. And if that gets done, basically it doesn't allow you to install that same name package again. And of course, in that case, you don't get test steps, you don't get screenshots, you don't get videos. That's typically how it goes. This was a few minute introduction to Bitbar Public Cloud, and we promised you some questions and answers, so let's go through some of them at this stage. There's a lot of questions. We don't have enough time to follow up and answer all of them, but we will definitely make sure that all these questions do get addressed, and we will follow up with you. So one first question: how does the integration of Bitbar testing and Greenhouse CI differentiate with others? What we saw with the build from Greenhouse, that's already significantly different than anything you can build on a cloud. Plus, when you combine that with real device testing on Bitbar Public Cloud, you just simply don't have to do any manual interaction at all to get that device run starting. We built a very intelligent queuing system in our public cloud, so that when there's a lot of tests initiated, they will all get queued, and each and every application will get their device time. Nikita, do you have any comments on this?
Yeah, I would say that at least from my standpoint, what I see is that this integration between Greenhouse and Bitbar is going to be definitely our most comprehensive integration and kind of a showcase for what you can accomplish when there is such a comprehensive integration between two services that each one of which does an excellent job of what it does, but also can work well together with another service that is also excellent at something different. As I said, this will be a two-way integration, so Greenhouse users will be able to use Bitbar, Bitbar users will be able to use Greenhouse, and our aim is to make this completely seamless so that you don't even have to think really about the fact that now I am setting up a build in Greenhouse, or now I am setting up a test run in Bitbar. It will be as unified as we can make it, so that you go through the setup once, you configure everything as you like it once, and from that point on is just kind of a set it and forget it scenario. Excellent.
Okay, there's another question is that will it be possible to read certain environments from the device clouds? And there's additional question to this, but yes, of course. Our devices are running basically with the Wi-Fi network connection. They can access any environment that real device would. But there's a ways to block that as well. If you don't want anything to get out on the back ends, or you don't want any of that data or networking data actually to go on specific locations, there's a ways to block that. And with the private cloud especially, we've done amazing configurations with some of the applications that need to run on local environment somewhere, and they basically cannot push any data out of that specific network. There's an additional question to this, so we're definitely going to follow up with you. Fortunately, we are soon running out of time, so I want to answer a couple of more questions here. There's a question for Greenhouse. Does Greenhouse support Calabash for iOS and Android? Will it be in the future, and will it be possible upon request?
We will be supporting it, most definitely. Yes, as I said, our approach is um, to whatever our users are using currently, as long as of course there is a sufficient interest in it, we will implement it. So we have multiple ways to contact us with any requests for any such features. We keep careful track of them, and as soon as something becomes popular enough and tips the balance, then we jump on it and we make sure that it's available.
Yeah. Same for Bitbar. So basically, we've been supporting Calabas for a few years now with the device testing. Calabas is one of the most popular cross-platform frameworks. So Appium is the other one. So cross-platform in this context mean that it works for the same way for Android and iOS, and you don't have to tweak the tests when you build those for a specific OS platform. Another question, does Greenhouse require any local tool installation when you do it? So is it everything on the cloud?
Absolutely. You don't need to do anything other than give us your URL repo and access if if it's a private repo, and we take it from there. You don't need to install absolutely anything.
Yeah, and that really makes it powerful because you are not required to do much to get the build going and get the connected with the SCMs. And
Absolutely, we've had numerous teams come in where somebody takes the lead and sets up the project on Greenhouse, and the other people aren't even aware of anything having happened. They just start pushing code to whatever it is, GitHub, Bitbucket, and we start running the builds automatically and running the tests automatically and reporting the results to them.
Yeah. Two more questions. So, can you fetch test results back to your local environment from Bitbar standpoint? Yes. So when you have a test finalized, like for example any of these test runs, you basically get email notification. You can use the REST API to pull all these results back. So video, screenshots, logs, everything, basically for the local inspection and get that stuff also. Investigated in the local environment. That's always an opportunity. One last question goes to Greenhouse. Is Greenhouse CI running on a cloud?
Yes.
How do you plan handle non-disclosure agreements and things?
We're definitely open to any kind of plan customization, any special agreements. We've already accommodated a number of requests from several fairly high-profile development teams. So get in touch, and I can't imagine we wouldn't be able to do something.
All right. Okay, one last question. Do you support SSO now? That's going to make us even. Any comments on that?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Do you support SSO now?
I'm sorry, I keep losing audio.
Okay, there's something with the audio, but let's call it evening. And there's so many questions. Actually, we thank you for all these questions and for you to join this webinar. It was a pleasure to talk to you about these things, and we will definitely follow up. And stay tuned. We will have integration soon available. It's going to be announced, and you'll definitely have a chance to try it out at some point. So, from my behalf, I want to thank you for joining, and also Nikita, thank you for awesome presentation, awesome demonstration. That was really a pleasure to see, fantastic build stuff on the cloud.
Well, thank you very much for setting this up, Viliveiko, and it was a pleasure to introduce Greenhouse to hopefully a wider audience.
All right. Thank you very much.